On men-at-arms, we're doing Game of Thrones.
I paid the iron price.
We shall have no king but Euron Greyjoy.
What is dead may never die.
I'm Matt.
I'm Kerry.
We are the Stagmer brothers of Baltimore Knife and Sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man-at-Arms, Reforged.
Euron.
With all the interest in Game of Thrones, we knew we were going to do another weapon. We've been trying to decide exactly what to do, and then watching this season, we saw that axe hit the screen.
We saw Euron Greyjoy jump out of a massive ship and wreak all kinds of havoc with an awesome axe. It has a squid on it, it's got a lot of detail, and it's really wicked, which is a nice throwback to the Iron Captain Victorion, who was said to wield a very similar axe, and who knows, maybe that is his axe. The shape of this axe is pretty complex, but we're gonna forge it anyway. How are you gonna tackle this one?
Well, the entire body of the axe is fairly sophisticated in terms of the forging that it requires. I will not be able to make it solid. Not only doesn't fit in the forge, the U-shape overall design of the axe requires a higher stroke capacity for the power hammer. I simply don't have that. So, I'm going to compose it from several pieces. Then, after both pieces are done and relatively close to shape, I'm going to forge weld them in the middle. And then, to reinforce the forge weld, fortunately, I will add the squid design that goes on the sides of the axe, adding that Greyjoy flair.
Alright, I now have the base of the axe drawn. I didn't have a lot of good artwork to base this off of because we have only seen this axe on camera a few times, but I think I did a pretty good job. At this point, I'm going to hand it off to John, and he'll get it cut on the plasma.
Okay, here's our Greyjoy axe. Just kidding. This is actually a template I cut out of some heavy gauge sheet metal that they can follow while they're forging it out.
Ilya begins drawing out the material for this axe. He's going to be using a top tool under the power hammer and constantly going back and checking the template for his form. Satisfied with the first half of the form, moves on to the remaining portion of this axe head.
Normally when we work with stock this size, we weld a handle to it. In this case, Ilya forgot to do that. No big deal though, he just takes a piece of square stock, punches it through the material, forge welds it solid. Now he has a nice place to grab it with tongs and work the material.
Ilya now uses different bottom tooling, setting it right down on the bottom die of the hammer. This allows him to both form the material and to hold it in place as he begins to get greater form. Acting as a second set of hands, Ilya brings the top ram down on the hammer to hold the material in place so he can drive it to form with a sledgehammer. prepare the surfaces for a forge weld, Ilya is going to be using a hot cut, cutting right into the edge of these pieces so that one will fit inside of the other. By doing this, he'll have a much higher success rate in welding this axe together. Ilya is now going back to the power hammer to forge more on this edge. He's going to have to be much closer to his final shape, as once it's forge welded into one large piece, it won't fit in our furnace.
The parts of the axe are now ready. The edge, which has a fish mouth opening, has the back inserted into it. I tack welded them in place to assist me in the forge weld process so they don't slide in and out. Now, you might notice that we're using a charcoal forge. There are two reasons for that. First of all, the charcoal forge allows us to place this conveniently on top of the fire. Second of all, charcoal provides for a better weld. When charcoal burns, it creates what is known as dry heat. That is, there are no water vapors inside the flame. Premium striking.
He now goes back to the large power hammer to finish driving the weld down and get this piece to match the original template.
Now that the edge is welded to the body of the axe, it's time to trim the excess. The excess is formed because of the distortions produced during the forge welding process, and usually that is calculated into the preform produced by the smith. Now, I'm using the hand plasma, the reason for that being that the axe has a variable thickness, and the CNC doesn't like that and will not do a very good job. Now I have to form the squid parts and then prep this piece so that the squid parts can be forge welded in the charcoal onto the surface of the axe. I've drawn with chalk the brief outline of the squid. I'm going to be using this template to form my wrought iron pieces. This is a piece of wrought iron that came from a wagon wheel made around the 19th century. The difference between iron, wrought iron, and steel is the following. Around the 18th and 19th century, wrought iron was the mass-produced metal for making structural pieces. A piece of bloom made in a blast furnace was taken to a series of power hammers and rolling mills to produce a long bar. It is fairly unrefined, and upon etching, you often see molten sand that comes in as black streaks running all the way down. And those streaks very often cause delamination and splitting in the wrought iron. It is the job of the smith, as the split begins, to forge weld them back hot. The reason why I'm using wrought iron is because it's very easy to forge weld, especially in charcoal. And upon etching, it very often gives a distinct color from the steel that we use.
The next step is to punch a hole and then cut 2 legs out from that. The reason you punch the hole is to try to prevent splitting. So after he's punched that hole, we'll move to a hot cut tool and split them in 2. With the hot cut now done, it's time to start adding some fluid form to the legs of our squid. As Ilya stated at the top of this process, sometimes using wrought iron, it's going to split on you. So you might see him use a little borax, forge weld the pieces back together as he goes.
All right, Ilya's done an amazing job on this axe. He had a lot to work through. I think the shape is spot on at this point. He's also got a lot of the wrought iron squid forged, so it'll go in there like that. My next job is just to clean up the perimeter, scuff the surfaces a little bit so they forge weld nice and tight, and then move on to edging the axe.
With his temperatures just right, Ilya now takes a wooden hammer and works the iron directly down onto the steel of this blade. This is a fairly simple steel, and along with the wrought iron, the welds will actually be fairly easy. It's really only the complex form that will fight him. Since Ilya has to maintain a fairly high temperature forge welding, he's going to be using a blower instead of a hand crank. All we really did was take a shop vac that we have turned down about 50%, attach it directly into the inlet of our hand crank for our blower, and he's going to go ahead and keep the charcoal and coal up at temperature. Since everyone else is busy in the shop on other projects, our friend Derek Kemper comes in. He's been working around the shop and helping us out for quite some time, but this is the first time you'll see him on camera. He and Ilya will both be working with large wooden hammers. It's a fairly safe way to force the material down and have the weld happen without changing the general shape that Ilya already created.
You would think after all these seasons of working with Ilya that I would have learned to keep my mouth shut. Not the case. I told him if he got this squid to forge weld to the body of the axe that I'd be happy to be the one that sculpts all the tentacles to shape. So that's where we are now. I'm gonna use an angle grinder and a hand sander, give this thing a lot more form, just round everything over, make it look a little more natural, then we'll move on to the next process.
The heat treat on this axe is going to be rather tricky. It has a whole lot of mass to it and a very thin edge. So Ilya's going to use the charcoal forge once again. He's going to heat up the base of the axe, get a decent amount of heat on it, and then you're going to see him moving the axe constantly back and forth to create a nice even heat on the edge, and he's going to move to the quench and water. temper this axe, Ilya's just gonna flash it over the fire a little bit, and then just use the mass of the heat that's captured within the body of the axe to pull forward and temper the edge.
Now that we've finished welding on the final detail parts of our Game of Thrones axe, our next step is to clean and blend up the surface of these. Then I can take our handle socket, we'll weld that in place, blend the welds out, and then start forming the pipe handle, which gets some shape to it before we leather wrap it, and that'll complete the project.
So what we're going to be doing for the handle on this, rather than setting it in wood, we decided with the amount of weight on this head, we'd actually form a metal pipe. I roughed it up on some 24 grit on the sander so it'll hold glue. We've socketed up in here, welded it in place, and then for a visual, we've actually added a piece of hickory down the bottom side. Since the handle's completely covered in leather anyway, I'm going to wrap right from this socket section. I'm going to run that leather all the way down right to the wood. So I'm going to use this leather. This is a very nice chap grade black. It's got a little bit of stretch in it. Until Game of Thrones returns next season, I think this is probably the best shots you'll see of this axe. We're going to be able to take this out and do some real damage in the demos and show you exactly what something like this would do. Click here to subscribe, or click here to watch more episodes. Thanks for watching Man-at-Arms Reforged. We need to know what you want the guys to build, so tell us in the comments below what weapons you want to see next.